Do you want a simple, go-to way to help manage mental, emotional, and physical pain? I got you. My name is Vikky Santana. I'm 58 and a half years old. I've been living with chronic pain a good portion of my life. And if you would have told me that I would be able to manage physical pain, emotional pain, and mental pain with some of my yogic practice and my meditation practice, I would have told you you're on crack and you're crazy. But actually, after narcotics and all these other different medicines and techniques failed, I had no option but to go inward and find some of those solutions. And now my life purpose is to help other people find their way out of pain and living a fuller life. So let's get started. First, let's understand pain, because we tend to separate mental, emotional, and physical pain, and we tend to think that there are three separate things, but actually they are more intertwined than you can ever imagine. Modern imagery shows that when we experience mental pain, emotional pain, and physical pain, the same areas of the brain light up. So here's the thing about pain. We may burn our hand, but it's not the cells in our hands that are feeling the pain. They're just sending the information up into the brain, and then the brain interprets the level of sensation that we're feeling, depending on our threshold, depending on our past, depending on a lot of different things. We'll register it as pain and then react to it, usually unconsciously, appropriately based on how we have done in the past, primarily in survival mode. Now, you've probably heard your yoga teacher say that your issues are in your tissues. It's a great bullet point, but let's get into that a little deeper. Before we move forward with the solution, I want us to understand this concept of where pain lives, how we perceive it, and how much control we actually have instead of how much control it has over us. Let's take something that a lot of us have probably experienced, heartbreak. Maybe you have that one big love in your life that once it was over, the grief and the loss, doesn't matter how it happened, but the grief and the loss that came along with it was heartbreaking. There's a reason it's called heartbroken. And again, modern imagery has shown that if the heartbreak is big enough or we respond to it strong enough, our heart actually changes. Its physical shape, they call it bubbling up, but it actually gets bigger, and that's the pain that we're feeling of it actually taking up more space. Luckily, with stress management techniques and over time, if we find a way to recover from that and go through that journey, the heart goes back to its normal size. So it's a temporary situation, but it crystallizes how an emotional response changes your physical body. Because let's really look at it. Although we think that heartbreak, that thought, that emotion was very real, nothing physically happened to us. We were not in any kind of physical or survival needing threat. But our interpretation of the situation, like, I'm going to die without this person, that response and that profound stress and grief that we put ourselves through literally changed the physical makeup of a part of our body. Let me give you another example. When I was like in my early 20s, I had to give a presentation. And to know me back then is to know that I was deathly, that's the key word here, deathly afraid of speaking in public. So as that presentation date got closer, I put myself further and further and further into stress until the night before I ended up in the ER with a horrible anaphylaxis allergic reaction. The nurse said that I only had this much in the middle of my back that didn't have hives on it. So if you know about allergic reactions, by the time you have hives on the outside, you got a lot more hives on the inside. They kept me there for 5 days because they could not manage, they couldn't get my blood pressure to stay at a normal level. The hives were still there and they couldn't get rid of them with regular medication, and they were afraid, for my safety. Now, in hindsight, I've long since now known that that was an emotional response to the fear of a social death, because I was just so scared of speaking in public. I was so scared of speaking in public that I made myself ill. It physically manifested itself in my body. And there was physical proof of being under that duress. But again, nothing had happened to me. I was not in any physical danger. And yet, I responded to the situation with so much stress as if my life depended on it. The reason I tell you these stories is because things don't happen to us. What we feel when we are experiencing an emotional, when we're experiencing a mental or a physical situation, is our interpretation based on our perspective. What does that mean? Well, it's not that anything's happening to us, especially if nothing's touching us, but when we see things, when we experience things, when we encounter different things, people, situations, circumstances, our perception of them will dictate how we react to it. And that is actually in our control. It's just that no one's ever taught us how to actually separate what we think, what we feel, and what we physically experience. We think that this reaction is deserved, makes perfect sense, and is not controllable. It couldn't be any further from the truth. I'm here to tell you, because when I was laboring with my daughter, I didn't take any medications. I did it all with no meds. All right, I took a Tylenol around the 11th hour. I labored with her for 24 hours. And yeah, it was a physical challenge, but it was completely manageable because I was managing my breath. Here's how I know it was my breath and my mindset. After 24 hours of laboring and pushing, it was obvious that she wasn't going to come out. She was faced a certain way. So at that moment, I made the decision that I was going to okay the emergency C-section. And the moment I took my eye off the ball of managing my pain, the moment I surrendered to having a C-section, I was shocked at how literally unbearable the pain was, pun intended. I couldn't tolerate it. I could not wait for them to get a spinal block in me, because at that point I had mentally given up. I had stopped doing my breath exercises, and now it was like an all-encompassing pain. Nothing had changed except the way I was breathing and my mindset. And those are just a few examples of how we react to the world and how it affects us. Now, the underlying thing that's happening during these situations is how we're breathing. We don't notice it, but we have a breath signature for every single way that we respond to the outside world. I like to say the rhythm of our life is based on the rhythm of our breath. So if we're breathing really, really shallow with the upper lobes of our lungs and our abdominals contracted and it looks like this, that is stress breathing. That's shallow breathing. That's turning on our fight or flight response in our nervous system. And then what happens is we're already stressed from a physiological perspective. We're already on alert. So it really doesn't take very much for someone to poke that bear and for us to overreact. And then it just kind of feeds on top of itself, because when we are stressed, just because we changed our mind doesn't mean that our nervous system automatically flips to the other side to rest and digest. In fact, it stays active for a little while, just in case whatever perceived threat comes back. So once we're in that state of, it's challenging to take ourselves out of it unless we're consciously trying to do it. It usually doesn't happen right away, because before we know it, there's another thing that comes along that annoys us or pisses us off or makes us doubt ourselves or produces another automatic negative reaction, and that just ratchets up our tenseness. The thing about being tense, the thing about breathing shallow, the thing about breathing unconsciously or with your abdominals contracted like this, the more stressed we are, the more on alert our nervous system is, the higher the volume of perceived pain we get. Remember, labor had pain, but I was managing it because I was focusing and I was breathing through it a certain way. The moment I stopped breathing, the moment I surrendered to the pain and I was waiting for something else to bring me relief, it was unmanageable. I couldn't wait. I looked like the exorcist. I really was expecting for my head to turn around 360 degrees. That's what it was feeling like. And stress actually is a good thing. It keeps us sharp when we're getting in front of a camera for recording for our YouTube channel, or it keeps us sharp when we're on the road, or when we are literally being chased and our life is in danger. The problem is that we have adopted those same survival skills for red lights or getting late to meetings, or if our boss yells at us, we react the same way as if we're dying. Remember, it could be a financial death, it could be a social death, it could be any number of deaths that we're feeling threatened by, even though we are not physically, our life is not physically threatened. So we've kind of transitioned how we reacted in the bush to how we reacted now in this concrete jungle. And it has a lot to do with our perception of ourselves, our self-worth, and how we misidentify ourselves. Okay, all the while we're reacting to the outside world, there's this breath pattern. Every reaction, every emotion, everything that we do has a breath signature to it. The thing is that we're not paying attention to it. No one taught us, no one told us to. But if we paid attention to how we're breathing, we would notice that we have our abdominals contracted and we're breathing with the upper body primarily. What we want to do is we want to switch that. We want to turn that around. We don't want to breathe with a contracted belly. We want to start dropping the breath down into the abdominals. We have a muscle right about here. It's called the diaphragm. And for the lower lungs to get full of breath, that has to drop down. That has to get smaller. The way it gets smaller is our belly expanding forward, organs move out of the way. That signals to the diaphragm to contract. That signals for breath to go into the lower parts of our lungs. In addition to that, when you expand the belly, that's telling your nervous system via the vagus nerve, that's telling your brain via the vagus nerve, via the nervous system, that you are safe, that you don't have to be on alert, that you don't have to be fight, flight, or freeze, that you are safe enough to be in rest and digest. And that state is the one that we want to live our lives through more than anything else, because also when we're in rest and digest, we make better choices. Pain volume begins to come down and it's more manageable. But while we're like this in defense mode, any little bit of pain is going to feel that much more. And the fact that we're already stressed and we can't take anymore, or we're edgy, super sensitive to what's happening in the outside world, we just can't take one more thing. We're beginning to like implode mentally because there's just so much sensory input, mental input, emotional input, and all of it being negative, and our nervous system being up on alert. It's really hard to juggle all those balls. In comes the breath though. Change the breath, switch your nervous system to the rest and digest, and you will find a lot of wonderful things happening in your life. One being our ability to separate ourselves from the sensations in the body, separate ourselves from the thoughts or the ruminations, and separate ourselves from our reactions, we know them as emotions, to the outside world. Because here's the thing about the outside world. We might think that things are happening to us and that's what creates our suffering, but actually it's our interpretation and our perspective that creates how we react to the outside world. Because the outside world is going to be doing whatever it does, but how we interpret it, and there are 8 billion interpretations of the outside world out there, but how we interpret it based on how we perceive it, that will dictate how we respond to it. And depending on how we're breathing in that moment, it will dictate whether it is a stress response that's not favorable and doesn't help us, or a more relaxed, conscious, grounded, center, higher level thinking response. But as it relates particularly to pain, when we are less stressed, the body has the opportunity now to actually start healing itself. It's not in fight or flight, so it doesn't have to be stressed. So instead of cortisol and adrenaline being pumped out, we have more euphoric, healing brain chemicals being poured out, like dopamine, just all the euphoric drugs that help us heal instead of just survive. Belly breathing. That is the number one thing that I prescribe. And yeah, I use breath as prescriptions when I start helping people move through grief, manage their pain in their life, and start moving forward. But the foundational breath is belly breathing. And belly breathing is so easy. What I want you to do is don't even watch me, because this is about you right now, and this is about you just listening to my voice. Pause this if you need to, but find yourself laying down with your knees bent, feet flat. Get nice and comfy. If you need some head support, very light head support, nothing super high. And find yourself in a comfortable place, arms down alongside your body with the palms facing up at first, knees bent, feet flat. And just close the eyes, because I want you to start going inward instead of, taking all of this input from the outside world. Then once you feel comfy, place the right hand onto your belly and your left hand onto your heart. On your next inhale, allow your belly to expand forward. Now, I don't mean for you to push it forward or force it forward. I want you to visualize yourself feeling your belly filling up with breath. It's that simple. And then when it's time to exhale, just let go of the breath and feel your belly fall. Then we repeat. Inhale with a Buddha belly. Let the breath go, feel the belly fall. And I'm going to breathe along with you. Inhale with a Buddha belly. Let the breath go. Inhale, belly expands. Exhale, breath exits. Continue with that belly breathing as I talk through it. And I just want you to feel the belly expanding and the belly falling. And you might think, oh, Vikky, how can this possibly make such a big difference in my life? Because it's telling your brain to get out of the stress state into the more relaxed state. And in the relaxed state is where the healing happens. In the relaxed state is where the ruminating, negative, stress-building, defensive thoughts go away. While we're still tense and in defense mode, we cannot get away from our pain, because pain is an alert system, part of our survival system. However, once we start belly breathing, everything starts switching into the opposite direction. Now, it's going to take time. My prescription for most people is do this 5 minutes a day and to be consistent. That means Fridays, Saturdays, and Sunday. You breathe every single day. Hi, Thor. You breathe every single day, and teaching ourselves to change the way we breathe, well, we have to do that every day. And it's just 5 minutes. 5 minutes every single day to get ourselves accustomed to breathing a different way. I like to do it either while I'm still in bed, either in the morning or at night, because I'm already laying down. In fact, I do it both times, to be honest with you. I do it for 5 minutes before I get out of bed, and that helps me ease my way out of slumber to starting my day, but in a nice, relaxed fashion, instead of an, oh, beep, feet hit the floor and hit the ground running to start my day already stressed. And then at night, before I go to sleep, it helps me to just make that transition from a super active mind to a more relaxed mind. After you've done this for about a week, maybe 2, because we never want to rush this, right? Creating a nice solid foundation is so important. Adding on more too quickly doesn't give us more bang for the buck. So I'm going to come back in a couple of weeks, and then we're going to start learning how to do this in a seated position so we can incorporate this type of breathing into our whole life. But for now, 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes at night while you're on your back. I always say the bed is the best place to do it in. And then take notes of how or what kind of changes that you're beginning to see on your pain, on your stress levels, maybe even the choices that you're making. So I'll see you back in a couple of weeks. Remember, I'm Vikky Santana. If you like what you saw, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. From me to you, I want you to not just survive, I want you to thrive. So let's do it together. See you next time.